Good morning. Today we're going to look at John 11, verses 30 through 57, the continuation of the story of the raising of Lazarus from the dead, and finding out at the end then that Jesus is in more trouble and more highly sought to be arrested. But yesterday we ended with Martha having spoken to Jesus and running back home and telling her sister Mary that Jesus was asking for her. So Mary gets up quickly and goes out to find Jesus. And when she gets there, Jesus is still in the same place that Martha had talked to him. It doesn't tell us where that was, and that's totally beside the point. But as in Martha's conversation, it appeared more that just Martha was there. In this conversation, some of those who had been with Martha and Mary mourning with them saw Mary leaving and went along. It says, some of the Jews that were in the house with her, consoling her, saw Mary get up and go, and they followed her because they assumed she was going to the tomb to weep there, which would be very common. Just yesterday, Memorial Day, we were at the cemeteries, two cemeteries at McHenry, the Bethlehem and Saints Peter and Paul, and you could see that there had been people there at the graves. There were flowers and crosses and lots of things there that, especially at this time of year, we go and we visit the graves of those loved ones that are no longer with us. And so this loss of her brother was fresh, 4 days old. And so the people, why wouldn't they assume that she's going to the tomb to weep? Very common. But as she goes, she comes to where Jesus is, and she kneels at his feet, and the same exact wording that Martha used. The gospel writer John says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And Jesus sees the tears that she's crying, and he sees the tears of those others that are with her, and he knows that depth of emotion too. That it says that Jesus was greatly moved in spirit, or greatly disturbed in spirit and in mood, and deeply moved. And he asks, "Where have you laid him? Where is his tomb? Where is his grave?" And the invitation, "Lord, come and see." And it says, that verse 35, in the King James, New King James, it's simply "he wept" or "Jesus wept." In the New Revised Standard that I have in front of me, it says Jesus began to weep. He was moved with this compassion. He understood human emotion. He was feeling a loss also. And it's a reminder for us that God isn't just, an impartial God that's out there someplace, and doesn't have any idea what it is to feel pain, emotions, sorrow, anger. But Jesus was moved deeply in spirit, and he began to weep as well. And this was before he was even at the tomb. And I think about that, as we gather for a funeral for a family member, and sometimes one of the family will share some words, or especially at the prayer service, we have stories and things told. And so often as we listen to those stories, the people are overcome with emotion and tears flow. And they need to stop and compose themselves. And sometimes, especially as a male, we feel that we shouldn't cry, and we're self-conscious about it. But I truly believe that God gave us tears as a way of cleansing and healing. And that our emotions, when we let them out, it's one of the most beneficial things that we can do. And Jesus models for us that it's good. It's good to feel that pain. It's good to feel that loss. It's good to be emotionally hurt when someone we love dies. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a part of being a normal, healthy human being. But Jesus begins to weep. And some of the Jews that were there said, "See how much Jesus loved this man Lazarus." But others said, But just think, he gave sight to the blind man. Maybe if he could have been here, he could have stopped him from dying. A little bit of the finger pointing, a little bit of the wondering, a little bit of the questioning. And then it says, verse 38, then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled across in front of it. And his words, take away the stone. And when he says that, Mary rather, but Lord, his body's going to stink. It's been 4 days. It's been, that you think about, today we embalm the bodies. We do things so that, they preserve them, at least for a while. But in Jesus' day, the bodies were buried, and they would put smelling herbs and spices and things in there to help cover the stench of death, because there is a stench of death. And she said, Lord, it's not going to be pretty. Jesus said, believe. They rolled the stone away. Jesus raised his eyes upward, it says, and he prays. This is his prayer. Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me, but I pray this for the sake of the crowd that's gathered here, so they may believe that you sent me. And then he raises his voice and he says, Lazarus, come out. And suddenly, this Lazarus, this body bound head to foot, comes out of the tomb. He's bound head to foot. He's not walking. He's not coming, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. He's coming out of the tomb. Think of what kind of reaction would you have? Shock, dismay, wonder, terror? But Jesus looks and he says, unbind him and let him go. And they do that. And it says that many of the Jews that were there believed in Jesus that day, but others ran to the Pharisees, to the chief priests, and told of what Jesus had just done. They were spies in the midst of the crowds, maybe. But the Pharisees call a meeting then. And what are we going to do with this Jesus? He's doing so many signs. And look at this. Look what he just did now. How many more people are going to believe in him? How much more trouble is he going to cause for us? We got to do something about this guy. But Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, and we hear of Caiaphas again as Jesus is on trial. He's brought before Caiaphas and Herod and Pilate and all of those. But Caiaphas is the one that says, you don't understand. It's better for you if one man dies for the people than the whole nation to perish. They were all concerned that the Roman government would squash any revolution, any revolt, and that this Jesus was getting so much attention that, the Roman government may come down hard. But as Caiaphas said that, he somewhat prophesied of Jesus' death. In verse 53, so from that day on, they planned to put him to death. They were planning. And then it says that Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but he went to a town called Ephraim, out near the wilderness. He kind of, hid out for a little while. He hid out until the time was right. Verse 55, when the Passover of the Jews was near, they were looking for Jesus and wondering, do you think he'll come? And the chief priests and the Pharisees, the scribes, had given orders that anyone who saw Jesus, who sighted Jesus, was to come and let them know so that they could arrest him. Jesus knew all of this was happening. He knew this was all going on. He knew that they were watching him closely, laying in wait, trying to find a way to put him conveniently out of their way. And so I don't know how much time went between the raising of Lazarus, but he spent some time out there in that community of Ephraim in the wilderness before the time of Passover came again, and he came back to Jerusalem. He could have stayed hidden. He could have quietly gone away, but he didn't. He came back for you and for me.